Now, Meg Loney is best known for being a part of the incredible folk trio Wildwood Kin. Meg was going from success to success in the music industry, touring almost all the time and gaining international fame. But around 5 years ago, she decided to leave the music industry, and after a calling that God had put on her life was just bubbling to the surface. She is now working alongside young people at risk of homelessness in Exeter. And she joined me to share her incredible story. I sat down with Meg and asked her what life was like growing up.
Well, I grew up in a Christian family. So I grew up getting taken to church every week on Sunday. Went to quite a kind of free, charismatic church. And I remember totally loving it as a kid. I loved the community there. It really felt like a big family. And I think we were at that particular church till I was about 6 or 7 years old. So I had quite like happy early memories of church and family. I think after that, as I kind of got older, I maybe started to notice more, I guess, cracks in my family life. I think my parents, I love them loads, but they had a really tough marriage. And so home life felt quite dysfunctional quite a lot of the time. Communication it often felt like, just quite tense at home. I think I grew up with 3 brothers. Sadly lost one in 2016, but growing up in a sort of bigger family, it was it was great fun in a lot of ways, but also home life was also quite difficult. My brother, my oldest brother, as a teenager, got quite heavily into drugs, and that had quite a major effect on my parents as well. And so my mum suffered quite significant depression when I was a child and sort of through my teens. And although she really did her best, I think, it was just really, really a struggle for her processing that time. And so I think I probably grew up quite quickly and learned to be independent quite quickly, because my mum wasn't always able to kind of be there for us in probably the way we needed. And I think 'cause I was the only girl, I particularly really needed my mum around. And while she totally did her best, she wasn't able to be super present. And then her relationship with Dad was also really tricky. So I'd say, I loved my family, but it was definitely really hard growing up through that time, especially sort of from the age of 8 to about 16. That was a really challenging time for me, for sure.
You know, even just for some of the things that you've mentioned just there, the fact that your parents found marriage life really hard, and even you spoke about your mum suffering with depression. Some of those things are quite taboo things within the Christian world. Wow. How did you find that kind of growing up in that environment, someone who's involved in faith but experiencing things that are quite unspoken about or taboo in the Christian world?
Absolutely, yeah. I think it was super hard. I feel so grateful for the way that kind of awareness of mental health, I think, has really come a long way since then. I think in church now, at least, you know, in most of the churches I've been a part of over the last few years, mental health has actually been amazingly kind of well talked about in church. And a lot of people now, it's very normal to be a Christian in therapy. And it's actually really celebrated to be a Christian in therapy, because there's a sense of actually this is going to enrich our journey with Jesus. It's not a hindrance. But I think, when I was a kid, and especially for my parents' generation, mental health was really taboo. And I think being a Christian in therapy was really taboo. It would kind of be like, what about, God being good all the time? And like, I think there was a lot of stigma around having struggles with mental health. And So I think in my family, it kind of was this big secret. And I remember, definitely as I got older, going to church and finding it really hard that when we were at church on Sunday, it was kind of like this happy families performance thing. Whereas then at home in the week or even on the drive home from church, it would be like a total blowout in my family. It'd be big, the kind of arguing or the bad communication would kind of start as soon as we left church. And I just remember thinking, even when I was younger, finding like the discrepancy really, really hard, and being like, well, on Sundays we're being taught that Jesus, brings life and love and forgiveness and reconciliation and redemption and peace, and we're talking about all this stuff, and then the rest of the time I'm not seeing that acted out, and all I'm feeling at home is like quite unsafe, or quite it felt quite chaotic, and I didn't really enjoy being at home a lot of the time. So yeah, I think, and that kind of increased as I got older as well, into my teenage years. I found that really hard and was struggling to kind of see how faith life could connect to my day to day. So yeah, I think that left me with quite a lot of wrestling and questions for sure.
I know that when you were in your kind of early teens, you decided to stop going to church, and things kind of went a little bit downhill from there. Can you tell us about that?
Definitely, yeah. So when I was 13, we were going to quite a charismatic church, with lots of young people. There was quite a lively community, I guess, of young people and teenagers my age. I think as the youngest sister of three older brothers who were all quite, grungy, like skaters, and, they were into pretty like heavy music. And so I got really into that as well. And so my friendship circle was quite, it's kind of like the outcasts and the metalhead kids. And like, sadly, I guess with that territory, it was quite connected to like drugs and partying and, like general kind of mischief, I think. And that was like my friendship group. And I remember at the time still having hope that there was something positive about church and about Jesus, and that it could bring, even though there was like the tension of it, I really just wanted to believe, I think, that like there was hope in Jesus. And so I remember I started inviting my friends to this youth group, and my friends at the time, had really tough stuff going on at home. Like, my home life was quite tough, but for them it was really intense. Like, some of them, their parents were drug dealers or working in the sex industry and stuff. It was really intense, or like had absent parents or were in the foster system. And I remember bringing them to church thinking, oh, maybe they'll get a taste of this Jesus stuff and maybe it'll actually make a difference for them. But I think, no disrespect at all to the youth leaders at that church, but I think it's really new to them having kids like that come along. I think they found it really hard, and they were really worried that these kids were kind of going to corrupt the younger kids. And so there was a bit of a divide, and I think it basically resulted in my friends feeling really unwelcome in church. And I think for me, that was like the straw that broke the camel's back. I was like, actually, if the most needy and the most marginalized people can't find home in church, I just don't want to be a part of it. And I don't want, I'm sick of the hypocrisy of like being told Jesus is about love and acceptance and grace, and then not actually experiencing that, in the same way that I was frustrated that, my family life was like saying all this stuff at church and then behaving differently at home. So I think the combination of all those things just really hit me hard. And then after that, I think my life sort of spiraled down the same road that a lot of my friends were going down, which was, like drugs and, just like living a very self-focused life. And it was all about the next kind of getting the next high and the next transcendent experience. I think in hindsight, I look at it with, more compassion probably than I did when I first became Christian. I think I wanted to be like, I didn't want any of my past, and like, I just want to disconnect from it as much as possible. But I think I now look back at it as being like, actually, the drugs and the partying and everything else, it was like me desperately seeking escape from pain at home and difficulty at home, and also seeking like something, spiritual and transcendent. And I think I was looking for God the whole time, like the true God, even though I was, going about it in a destructive way. But basically, because, when you focus on, just serving yourself and not God, it never ends well. So I think when I was about 17, I hit a bit of a rock bottom where I just realized, my life feels so empty and so like self-driven, and I'd been through quite a lot of quite toxic relationships, and I'd kind of just hit the reality like this hasn't brought me any life. It's just actually like really messed up my sense of identity and my sense of purpose. I just didn't feel like I had any purpose. My friendship circle had just become very toxic, and like the trust was really damaged. And yeah, I think at that point I was really low and I was really desperate. And that was kind of when I started, I think I probably did start praying again in the kind of weird way of just being like, God, if you're real, you better show up. Kind of like angry teenage prayers. And I guess that was where things started to turn around.
Yeah, I just want to go back to something that you just mentioned about some of your friends that you were around who desperately needed kind of belonging, and they needed people to love them maybe in a church context, and not feeling like those people in church actually were capable of doing that, because those young people were going to corrupt the younger generation of young people, whatever. That's so interesting, and I think probably something that, would it be fair to say that's something that we still see in the church today, this kind of fear of young people, of people in general in churches who have gone through extremely difficult things, because maybe we're afraid of sin, or we're afraid of things that people have gone through. Is that something that you've seen?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. I think it's still like one of my biggest bugbears about church, even the most amazing and well-meaning churches. And I think we're all guilty of it sometimes. Like, we're all guilty of, walking down the high street and seeing someone, maybe they're like rough sleeping, and they're maybe like, yelling at the street, or they're high or whatever. And that can feel like quite threatening and quite scary sometimes. And I think as Christians, we probably all do need to address that we give in to fear a lot of the time around people who most need our love and most need our support. And like, I'm always like, I think every day is a journey of being like, just like choosing the invitation to love instead of fear people who are living differently from the way we are. And I just think this is what makes the gospel so timeless and so challenging and so amazing, is that Jesus like always leaned in to love and always rejected fear, and never like partnered with other people's fear around who's in and who's out. And but yeah, I definitely still see it in church a lot, and I still see it, I think, in myself a lot, even when I really try and feel called to the marginalised. But there's always going to be situations that feel new and feel scary, and where you see people who've gone through like unimaginable pain and responding with behaviour that can feel aggressive or can feel challenging or chaotic or whatever. And I'm always trying to ask God, like, help me to see people the way you see them. But it is hard, and I understand it. But I think when I was a teenager, I was a lot more judgmental and just being like, well, screw you guys, if you can't do that. But I think, now I'm able to kind of see that I think for all of us, it's a very real struggle, and we're kind of in our flesh, we're wired to like fear difference, and we're wired to fear stuff we don't understand, or like, so I get it, but also I do think like I would love to see the church really like overcoming fear in an intentional way, and really doing the costly stuff of going to the most needy and the most damaged and the most traumatized, and like meeting them in that place with the love of Jesus. Sorry, that's a bit of a long answer to your question.
No, it's great. And it's so true. I think that's what we're called to do. We're called to radical love, aren't we? Even in those moments that just feel really against our nature in some ways. No, that's great. And I just want to go back to your story. And I know at the age of 17, it was a book that was pretty significant in your faith journey. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so I've always been super enthusiastic reader. I love reading. As soon as I was able to read, I just like consumed books. And by the time I was 17, I'd probably read like most of the stuff in my bookshelf and in a lot of the bookshelves of my brothers or my parents. But I think like God heard my angry prayers. And I remember there was one morning where I walked down into the kitchen and there was this book left on the side that my dad had just finished, and it was Red Moon Rising by Pete Greig. And it was all about the kind of birth of the 24/7 prayer movement, which was basically like very ordinary, very imperfect people just like getting into prayer rooms and praying consistently for like God to move in their locality, and seeing God move in incredible ways. And, through that place of like praying, God really leading them to then, reach out to their community and reach out to the most broken, and basically spread the love of God in like various parts of the world. And I remember, I picked it up and started reading it, and just like it was instantly like so compelling to me. I think like where I'd been really disillusioned with like, church is just a bunch of people pretending to be perfect and like, judging people who need help. Like I think it really challenged that kind of narrative for me, because it was literally, you couldn't question that these people were like doing the real stuff. And I think it gave me hope again that like following Jesus could change the world, and that there were people, doing the Jesus stuff basically. And I think from that point, I started reading the Gospels again, and I think seeing Jesus for who he truly was, and not just like, seeing the way that he was or like wasn't being represented in the churches that I'd experienced. And I was just like, with all of my like resentment and kind of struggle to understand the way church was doing it, like when I was reading about Jesus and his life and his words, I was like, there's nothing that I can challenge about like, where the church has been so broken and so fallible in so many ways. Like Jesus is just so infallible and like so timelessly like right. And it was funny because I'd be reading it kind of looking for like, a loophole and like a crack in the system of like, but the more I read about Jesus, the more I was like, this guy is amazing. And these teachings are amazing. And then reading the Gospels alongside reading this book about the church, like trying out the way he lived, and seeing it like bear fruit, I think it just brought me life. Like I think where I'd been so stuck in like selfish living or like misguided living or like trying to sort my own pain out in my own way, like without God. I think it like to see a new way of living, and even me reading about it made me feel like the most myself I'd felt in a really long time. And I think I just started thinking, flipping heck, this is true, and this is how I want to live. And that kind of was the start of my journey towards Jesus again.
But at the moment, we're in our testimony hour. We've been hearing Meg Loney's story. Meg came to faith at age 17 after reading Pete Greig's Red Moon Rising, all about the 24/7 prayer movement. That was after a long time of rejecting faith in her teenage years. Meg eventually became part of the acclaimed folk band Wildwood Kin with her two cousins. I asked her whether music featured as part of her teenage years.
Yeah, it was. So as a kid, my mum was really musical. She used to do a lot of worshipy stuff at church. I used to do like bits of drumming in worship team as a kid. Me and my cousins would do a lot of singing together as kids because their mum was my mum's sister, and she's also super musical. So yeah, we grew up doing a lot of like harmonies together. And yeah, I loved music. Even when I had kind of like rejected God and stuff, I loved being in bands and things and like jamming with my friends. And that's always kind of been something that's woven into the thread of my life, I guess. But in terms of doing it as a job, that was like completely unexpected. It was really funny. When I finished Red Moon Rising, I went to prayer meeting with my dad. He was going to like a 24/7 overnight prayer watch thing, and I asked if I could go with him, and he took me along. And that was kind of the first time I had experienced like the presence of God, like tangible in my life. And there was these old ladies there that prophesied over me, and one of the prophecies that they spoke over me was about releasing music to go out into the nations. And I remember thinking, like, I love music, but like I wasn't in any bands at that point. Like I didn't really know how it was going to look. I was also like, how on earth would that work? There's so many steps that, to put music out there. I didn't even know how to record music. But it was funny because it just really stuck with me, even though I didn't know how it was going to come about. It really stuck with me, and it just felt true, even though it also felt quite impossible. And when I was 18, I think because I was so inspired by 24/7 and the work they were doing, I applied to do this internship in the States with 24/7, which basically, long story short, ended up not working out due to like visa issues and stuff. And so I ended up with this gap year of like not knowing what on earth I was going to do, because I thought I was going to America and it didn't work. And so kind of I ended up moving in with my cousins for a little while. And I think we just started singing together and writing a few songs. And like after a bit of chat, we were like, well, we've kind of got a bit of a gap year here. Why don't we just like, write some songs, do some gigs, see what happens. It'd be a fun way to like, use the time this year. And so it really happened quite accidentally. And we just started doing a few open mics and stuff. And from that point, it kind of snowballed quite quickly. We got a manager, and then we got signed to a major label, and it was all like very quick. That was kind of the start of the musical journey. And from that point, we did end up recording music that did end up kind of going out into the nations, I suppose, and it took us kind of all over the world, really. And in a lot of ways, it was an amazing time, and it felt like God opened a lot of doors, and we really felt passionately that the songs we were writing needed to be about faith and about God, but putting it into ways that hopefully people could understand and connect with who didn't know Jesus. And for a while it was like a really cool time. But I think on the flip side, the industry is quite unforgiving and quite ruthless. And it's a bit of a taskmaster in that, you know, there's all this pressure on you all the time of like, if you do this thing, there'll be the next big break and you'll be able to do the next stage, or you'll be able to get playlisted on this radio station, or you'll be able to tour in this country, or you'll be able to do this TV show. Like there's always a bit of a dangling carrot. And the way that the industry works is to kind of just keep pushing and very quickly, like before we knew it, we were kind of touring all the time. We were living most of the time in like travel lodges and in the back of a van, and which I think like on social media seems really glamorous and seems like really cool, but actually the reality of it, you're very lonely, you're very like removed from your community. We weren't really able to regularly be a part of any church because we were just away so much. And you're not eating very well, you're not sleeping very well. And then in 2016, when we were kind of in our busiest touring cycle, one of my brothers passed away. We lost him to suicide, and that was like just completely earth-shattering. But there wasn't really the space to process that because, you know, we were at our kind of peak time where everyone was like, you need to keep going, otherwise you're going to kind of miss the boat to break into, you know, the industry or whatever. And I remember like a week or maybe 10 days after my brother died, we were doing Glastonbury, and it was just so intense. And so I remember just feeling like, you know, if everyone's counting on me to keep going and I don't want to let everyone down. And after Glastonbury, that kind of snowballed a whole other bunch of commitments and bookings and different things. And so I think, yeah, for probably a couple of years after that, it just felt like it didn't stop. And obviously, while on one hand, there were loads of really amazing opportunities, on the flip side, I think I started again to just feel quite empty inside, and like my soul was kind of really starved and broken. And again, I felt like I wasn't really living authentically, because it was like, I think my heart was so broken by what happened. And then there was all of this pressure to still be getting up on stage every night and, you know, making people feel good, I guess. And that was incredibly hard.
On that, you know, potentially, you know, spending years of not being able to grieve properly, what do you think that did to your the eventual grief process you had to go through?
I think probably for anyone who's experienced like a complex grief or a traumatic loss, they'll understand that like when the longer you try to put it off and the longer you kind of distract yourself, the more likely it is to kind of end up in breakdown. And I think that was basically what ended up happening. I got really, really ill, like physically and mentally, to the point where I just had to stop. I had to like leave a tour, like quite a significant tour that we were doing. I had to leave halfway through. And I remember just being in bed for like weeks and never wanting to go back to music and never wanting to go back to, you know, any of it. And that was like a really, really dark time. I think I was wrestling through a lot with God as well. And like the disappointment, because my brother was very unwell for a long time before he died. And there were so many people praying for him and, you know, speaking life over him and prophesying over him. And I think even when things were really bad, I was so sure that he was going to make it. And I think, losing him left a lot of questions to wrestle through with me and God. And even though like half of me really resented the busyness of everything, there was also part of me that was like, oh, if I can keep myself busy, I don't have to address this like disappointment I have in God and this kind of lostness that I feel in my faith. But I think, yeah, when I eventually kind of broke down, I was kind of forced to address those things. And then when lockdown hit, that was even more space for that, which, yeah, I know that lockdown was really hard for a lot of people. But for me, I mean, it was hard in that I had to confront a lot, but it was actually like a huge relief to have a long enough time to sit with what had happened to me and my family, and to go there with questions with God. It was around that time that I felt like God was asking me to study theology, to again like have the space to lean in to the big questions and to just really study his word and to get a sense of structure, I think, where it had all felt so like chaotic and erratic for 8 years. It was kind of the first time there'd been like spaciousness and structure and a kind of a grounding thing in my life, I guess. And so that was kind of the start of my theology journey. And kind of shortly after that, it felt like, I think towards the end of 2020, I felt like God was saying, you know, I'm releasing you from the band now, and, you know, you're going to have time to find who you are outside of this, and to take that pressure off yourself to keep performing. Because I think, yeah, I found a lot of identity in that as well, even though I kind of resented it. But also, like, when you feel like a lot of people like you and are celebrating you and are kind of like exalting the way you're living and like the creativity aspects, like, I think it's really hard not to fall prey to that. And so I think, yeah, and end of 2020 was like the first time I felt like there was space to really reflect on that and to walk away from that. But it was also really hard because a lot of people didn't understand why I was leaving and why I would leave when things like were perceived as so successful. And but yeah, I think it's a really hard thing as a Christian to be in a performative industry. Like I know that there's many people who are called to it and have the grace to do it and like really keep their integrity. But I think for me that was, yeah, it always felt like a real wrestle. And I think it's a very hard thing to do well and really stay close to God through it.
Tell me about moving back to the Southwest.
Yeah. That was really funny. I remember distinctly when I was 18 and I'd kind of first become a Christian, and it was before I was going to go to the States. And I remember praying such a kind of, in hindsight, stupid prayer. That was like, God, like, I'm up for being sent anywhere in the world. Like, send me to the farthest reaches of the world, as long as it's not Exeter. And classically, God's like, well, yeah. And so basically, yeah, after lockdown, I was living in London through lockdown, and because that was kind of where the industry was and everything. And after that, I came home to Exeter thinking that I was like coming back to sort of land before I kind of made the next move to wherever it was going to be. And over time, it sort of became increasingly clear that God was actually calling me back to Exeter, which I was super reluctant about at first, just because I think I associated Exeter with like a lot of trauma from family stuff and a lot of, like difficulty with my past, and like all the things that I struggled with most in my life felt connected to Exeter in some way. And so, yeah, I was pretty reluctant to stay. I tried to go to other places and it just didn't work out. I just felt like all the other doors were closing and I was quite hemmed in Exeter. And then, but then actually God really started helping me to fall in love with the city again. I was sort of studying part-time, doing my theology degree, and living with my dad. And I remember just feeling like this urge one day to like start learning skateboard, because I used to live in Cornwall and I loved surfing, and that was like a huge part of my life and the way I recharged. And then when I got to Exeter, you're quite far from anywhere where you can surf. So I was like, okay, I'm going to try skateboarding, which is quite funny. But I started going down to the skate park near my house at like 8 a.m, being like, don't want anyone to see me. I'm going to be like falling and making loads of mistakes. And so I'm going to kind of go at like the quietest time and try and learn. And I remember there was these two other teenagers who would come down. They were college students, and they'd come down at the same time. And I'd often like see them from the other side of the skate park. I'd kind of try and hide somewhere so that like they wouldn't laugh at me falling over and making all these mistakes. But eventually, I think because we would see each other so much at the same time every day, we got talking and we kind of started to establish this quite sweet, like familial friendship, and they would open up to me quite a lot about their lives, and I think they saw me as a bit of a like big sister figure. And I think from that, it felt like God was really stirring something, and he was really breaking my heart for young people in the city. And I was so aware of the fact that they, hadn't ever been to church or really heard about Jesus. And I couldn't imagine them being in a setting where they would want to go into a church. And I think I was just like, oh Lord, I would love to see young people in Exeter find spaces where they can go to learn about you, that connect with them and meet them where they're at. And then there was a job coming up at my church at the time, which was called St Basil's. I still go there. I still love it. It's been very redemptive for me, being part of a church that I love loads. It's not perfect, but it's amazing in so many ways. But they had a job going as a youth worker, and I felt really led by God to apply for this job. And it was there where I really learned a lot about what it means to work with young people. Kind of half of my job was working in a more like pastoral setting with the kids in the church, and then the other part of it, St Basil's were really good at kind of releasing me into missional stuff as well. So like sometimes it would be I'd go to the skate park and like chat to young people there, or sometimes it'd be going into schools and working with teenagers sort of on the edge of the care system, or sometimes it would be coming to the YMCA and doing a bit of volunteering here. And I think that was like the part of my job that really like felt like it sort of started a fire in me, and where I just felt like God was wanting me to be. And over time, it kind of became clearer and clearer that he wanted me in a missional context all the time, and working with the most marginalised young people as like a full-time thing. And that was where the YMCA job kind of came up.
Yeah, tell me about that. What does, so you're now there, that's your full-time role. Tell us about what you do with young people in Exeter.
Yeah, so I am a support worker in the YMCA's 31-bed hostel. So we've got a few different stages of accommodation. I work in stage 1, which is kind of the first port of call, where young people who are either experiencing homelessness or at risk of homelessness are going to come. So this is the first place they come in. And my job encapsulates quite a lot of things. A lot of it is, I guess it's support depending on whatever they need. I think to be homeless at 18, 19, 20, you've got to have been through pretty huge trauma. So a lot of the work I do is kind of helping them process that, or providing kind of spaces where they can feel loved and seen and listened to. Sometimes it's teaching them to cook a meal. Sometimes it's helping them with like learning to budget for the first time. Sometimes it's helping them get the right benefits or signposting them to mental health resources. Really, really varies. It's there's a lot of different kind of channels to what I do, but I totally love it. I think the thing that kind of keeps me going is, I think for some of them, they've never been told by anyone that someone's proud of them, or that someone cares about them, or that someone sees them and accepts them as they are. And I think like that makes the job so like, it just feels like such a massive privilege to be part of, I guess, offering them the love that Jesus offers, and getting to chat to them about Jesus if they're up for that. They're not always, but like when they are, it's really cool to tell them like the motivation for why we do what we do. It's been quite amazing to see the way that God has used my story as well. Like, I think I ran from it for a really long time of being like, oh, I wish I hadn't had that past. I wish I hadn't messed up my life in all these ways. And but actually now seeing the way that God has restored it and redeemed it, so that I can actually connect with the young people and what they're going through, and have something to offer in terms of being able to say, like, I've actually been there and I've actually experienced these things, and I know how hard it is. It's amazing to see how God has done that in my life, and like prepared me for this job.
As you kind of look back over your kind of your life so far, over the things that God has been doing, over the experiences you've had, what do you feel like is the biggest thing that you've learned about God, about who He is?
Amazing question. Gosh, that's a big question. But I think definitely, like, one of the biggest things I feel like He's taught me is overcoming fear. That His perfect love actually does cast out fear. Like when we do life with Him, that that He takes our fear away, and the fact that like He is with us means that we can live with love and not in fear. That's been like profoundly life-changing for me, because I think growing up, because home felt unsafe, my friendship circles felt quite unsafe, like a lot of my decisions were based out of fear and self-protection and being fiercely independent so that I wouldn't have to kind of rely on anyone. And so much of how I was living was based in fear. And I think learning to live in like the assurance of His love has been like the way He loves, and the way He radically loves us and shows us grace has totally changed my life. And it's the thing that I hope changes the lives of the residents. And it's something that they might ask about and be like, oh, why do you love us in the way that you do? Or like, why do you guys offer care in the way that you do, even when we mess up and stuff? I think they often, like, if they breach the license, or if they have a bad time, they'll often like expect punishment or expect to be kicked out, or like often they'll be like, are you going to kick me out? And being able to say, like, look, we care about you, and we're for you, and we believe in grace, and we believe in forgiveness, and being able to see the effect that has on them is like so extraordinary. And even just to like offer them a little bit of that grace that God offers me and offers the staff team and offers all of us, like, it's it's the coolest thing.
That was the voice of Meg Loney, a previous member of Wildwood Kin, now a youth worker with the YMCA in Exeter.